Welcome to Well Examined, the podcast where science and discovery meet intuition and wellness with your host, Christine Dionese. Each episode, I'll chat with the best minds in integrative epigenetic health, biohacking, neuroscience, quantum healing, and lifestyle design, as well as a slew of reputable citizen scientists across all facets of wellness. Welcome, friends. Today we're joined by Dan DeBon, the inventor and founder of Defender Shield. Dan is an internationally recognized expert in EMF radiation and shielding and EMF-related health issues with a special focus on the effects of exposure from mobile devices such as laptops, tablets, and cell phones. What I especially love about Dan's research is that he discusses the impact EMFs have on kids' health. And you all know I'm especially partial to kids' health. And exceptionally passionate about what parents can realistically do to protect their kids and their families from the different forms of EMF radiation in their homes, schools, and environments. I met Dan this past September in Florida, Upgrade Labs conference, and I'm really excited to have him on. We just hit it off and we immediately started, down the science trajectory and then brought it back to how people are living and communing today, and how we want to just live these amazing, beautiful lives and how we're going to mitigate all of that. So Dan, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today.
Christine, thanks so much for inviting me. I really do appreciate you inviting me to chat with your listening base. I'm always excited about the subject matter. And I do recall you are as well excited about these kinds of subjects. So I'm excited about our chat today.
Well, I've always been a very sensitive person. So before we had the technology, I knew something was up, right? Before we had all of the, research-based, evidence-based mitigation technology that you obviously have been into for several decades. So I am really personally and professionally excited here because a lot of my, clients, a lot of people listening are also very sensitive, and we want to use those sensitivities to our benefit, right? So,
Christine, do you know more than 20% of the population is in some form electromagnetic hypersensitive?
Yes.
And of that, 80% are women.
Yeah.
And we don't know why.
Well, tell me what the burning question is for every listener always. Okay, here's what well-examined people want to know. What's your ikigai? What is your passion? Like, what really brought you in? What's your personal story here? Where has it brought you to where you are now? Because you've been a part of so much innovation since you've been doing this.
For much of my career, I worked in telecommunications, and I ran the technical laboratories and developed the standards for the Bell system in the digital space I live in. So I had a lot of experience about the technology that was evolving for years and years. About 11, 12 years ago, maybe a little bit more, my sons, who were adult men, were sitting with their laptops on their lap. My wife says, and she's a social worker, that can't be good for having grandchildren. and I laughed at it. And I said, the power levels of the transmissions that are around that the laptop is just insufficient to be able to penetrate anything, including the cells of the body. And so, but you know what? I never thought about it much because my job was really to sort of test technologies and evolve those technologies. So I was never figure out how it interferes with people. It was always figure out what it does to other technologies. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking into it a little bit, and I was sort of surprised. Back then, there was an awful lot of data, but yet I didn't know about it, and I knew many, many others didn't know about it. And even at that time, after 3 to 4 hours, we knew that the male sperm, 25% of the male sperm is immobile on the average. And there were several studies that talked about it. With a female, it turns out that there was a very large study back then that talked about tumor. 2% of the population had tumor in the groin area. And of that, a very small percentage became cancerous. So I was sort of really, really surprised. It was like really quite eye-opening. And so because of my background, I began looking at the science side of it, the research side of it, as well as sort of the technology side of it. And as a result, I built my son's a pad that prevented the signals and electronics from passing through to the groin area. And we said we'd build 1,000 of them, and their friends wanted them, their friends wanted them, and all of a sudden I got involved in creating products that actually shielded a body from the emissions of electromagnetic radiation from the devices from us. And you got to remember, Christine, 20 years ago, none of this stuff existed.
Oh, I know.
Around us. It wasn't around us. And as I know, the body takes many, many, many years to modify itself to deal with the existing environment. So what we began seeing from the research was that there was impact and there was changes to the human body that needed to be talked about. And so I started with the laptop protection, and I read an article about parents that had a child, 16-year-old child, they bought a cell phone for in the peak of health when they got it. And a little over a year later, she died of her frontal lobe cancer. Now that is anecdotal. There's no clear statistical evidence that means anything to anybody. But to me, it was important because I knew I could stop that signal from passing through. Mm-hmm. Simple thing. So that's when I started looking at other ways of doing that, and on and on and on. And then after a couple of years, I realized the gap between science and all the research and the technical community and the medical community. It didn't exist. They were all silos. So my son and I wrote a book, Radiation Nation,
which I love.
And all I did, thank you. It was simple. I wrote it for grandmas. I didn't write it for a technical engineer to read and understand what the problem was. All we simply did is said, this is the research. This is what their findings are. This is what you can do to help yourself in this environment. And if you want to learn more, give us a buzz. It was like, we tried to be as simple as possible and it's like, why is potentially the cell phone potentially a danger for us? Mm-hmm. Well, let's think about it. The standard was created over 30 years ago by the FCC, and it was to protect the user from a cell phone. As a side note, 30 years ago, if you had a cell phone, you couldn't call anybody because none of your friends could afford it.
So, absolutely. Oh, I remember.
Right, exactly. And if you did, it was a big brick, and it was really difficult to carry around with you. So
those things were huge.
Yeah, they were huge, and you really were only on it for minutes at a time. Fast forward to today, you're on it all day. So the standard was created over 30 years of when those phones were in play. Mm-hmm. It turns out that they took 6-foot males in the military, and they looked at modeling what a penetration of 1.6 watts per kilogram would do to the brain. And what they decided, they would allow the signal to go into the head by 1 to 2 inches, and everyone would be safe. But you know what? That represents about 3% of the population. Mm-hmm. How about women? You give your 6-year-old child a cell phone to call the grandma, and they're using it not for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It's for an hour, half an hour, whatever it may be. And the signal that they created for a 6-foot male going 1 to 2 inches goes into the head of a child all the way through. And so if you think about it a little bit, what you have is a thermal emitting microwave signal from a cell phone penetrating a child's head at
I use thermographic imaging in my private practice. in the evidence. It's staggering at this point.
Yeah, you will see it with that, right?
You absolutely will.
Because it's thermal. But Christine, do you know almost everything you see in research, and there's thousands and thousands of studies over the years, including government studies, National Toxicity Program, and they show evidence of the dangers. And what's interesting about that, none of it is thermal. It's all biological. It's what happens to the cell over time. It's not what happens to a cell when it gets heated up by 2 degrees. You're looking at a thermal image of a child using a phone. You didn't have a brick. I didn't have a brick.
No.
30 years ago. And I became an adult when I began using it. But a child 6 years old uses it their entire life. No one knows what that really ultimately means.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, so you're saying you started the company because you wanted to have grandchildren, basically.
And by the way, Christine, I don't have grandchildren still.
What? How dare they not give you grandchildren yet?
I'm telling you, this series, I fixed the problem. They still didn't listen to me.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Well, I mean, this really resonates with everybody here because so many of my, my listeners in my private practice, I work in multi-generational epigenetics, right? So all of these listeners, they consider themselves, citizen scientists too. So I've been crowdsourcing all these questions as it pertains to a lot of the studies that you mentioned in your book. A lot of my clients were at Upgrade this year, or I buy your book and give it to my clients because you know what? These kids, they're spending time with their grandparents. Exactly what you're talking about. This is what's happening in the real world. So that's why I wanted to get some of these questions from people. So let me start off with asking you this. And I know you've answered this 100 times in other places, but let's talk about it here. So, a lot of my people listening, they already own your technology. I have the laptop pad. A lot of people have that too. But you and I previously discussed questions from consumers about where radiation travels once it's directed away from their devices while using their products, right? So when I asked you about this, you had replied, something that I expected to hear. You said most EMF detection devices being used in homes, even by many professionals, they're not calibrated in a way that will offer these accurate enough readings. So, I feel like we need to lay this discussion to rest in some sort of way. How can you speak to that?
As you may recall, Christine, I'm not a fan of beaters because people don't use them correctly. They begin panicking that they're in serious trouble, and the calibration. When I used test labs, I had calibration every year on all my equipment. That way, I knew what I saw was real. These things are orders of magnitude in error sometimes. And it depends on the device and how much it costs and how precise it will be. And so my coaching has always been just be aware of your surroundings. Take a look at where the sources are. First, for example, like a cell phone, you have like 3 or 4 transmitters out of a cell phone. You have your Wi-Fi, you have your Bluetooth, you have the cell phone, and you have the GPS. Do you need them all when you're using them? You have 4 signals potentially transmitting into the head when you use it on a cell phone.
It's dizzying.
Do you need them all? No. I use just a cell phone, right? The other ones I just turn off. I don't need them. And so meters are helpful if you're trying to understand the RF space, but if you're trying to understand the electromagnetic radiation, the AC in your wall, that's different. Those meters, typically RF meters, won't receive that even. So you're really better off trying to figure out where the sources are and then making sure you put distance, Wi-Fi, you can use wires. There's a lot of ways of reducing the exposures, and it doesn't necessarily require a meter to figure it out.
So you're really saying people need to get more basic.
Yeah, right, exactly. Don't panic about it. It's basic stuff. like in a bedroom, and we maybe have talked about this. A wall, the wire in the wall is generating milligauss power coming out of the wall is radiating. The stuff that's coming out of the wall is electromagnetic radiation, and it can be a lot, and it can disrupt your sleep. So when you have a headboard against your wall and power is running through those cables, it will potentially interfere with your sleep just as much as an RF signal from a cell phone or from a laptop or wireless router. So it's all about trying to understand your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being in epigenetics, I'm always talking about the minutia and all these different variables, et cetera.
Yep.
And,
yeah.
Sometimes you've got these meters and they're accounting for things that they don't even know that they're accounting for. So
right, exactly.
It's really important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're panicking about what they see.
Yeah.
And there's no panic involved. They're safe. Most places can be easily safe. With the simple things you can do around the house, you can live pretty safely.
So speaking of, epigenetics, in my practice, I'm working with people pre and post conception, as much as possible. But let's face it, a lot of people don't learn about EMFs until after they become parents. So as you know, enhancing, and protecting neuroimmunological development, I mean, it's everything for infants and young children. And you started talking about this in the beginning of the discussion, but can you talk a little bit more about how, EMFs in general, not just from...
I absolutely will. And you are absolutely right. Pre and post is like the whole cycle is affected by electromagnetic radiation. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you a story. When I wrote the book, I sent the book for review to Dr. Prasad. He's probably the most, brilliant man. And he's probably one of the first X-ray guys in the country. He had vast experience. And I mentioned to him that if you have a teenage girl that puts a cell phone in her back pocket and the cell phone's transmitting, it's hitting the egg. Absolutely. It can mutate that cell. And that mutated cell, 10 years later, can conceive a child. And that child has a mutated cell. He said, that's probably not true. And I said, well, there's science that shows that's true.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, okay. 2 years later, he calls me up and he said, I had a patient come in. She had a child and she was a high-tech lady and she had multiple mutated cells in the child, and the child passed away almost immediately. And he said, I didn't believe you then, now I do. Oh, so gosh. It's prenatal. It's before the child was born. Mm-hmm. And there was potentially some evidence. And here's another study down in San Francisco, I think it was a couple of years ago, 4 years ago or so. They gave a bunch of women who just got pregnant a meter. And they said, walk around and check where you are all the time. What they found in the study was that you were 3 times more likely to have a miscarriage in your first trimester when you're exposed to higher levels of radiation. And so that was not statistically significant. In other words, they didn't use 10,000 women, mm-hmm. but it's an indicator. There was some evidence that showed that when there was exposure, there was 3 times more likelihood of a miscarriage. And that's that ADHD. There are various conditions that are associated from the womb exposure to a child and its growth. And so Alzheimer's is an example, not Alzheimer's, what is it for children? I forget.
Oh, autism.
Yeah, autism, yes. Mm-hmm. And there are some studies that I've seen that show a correlation between exposures. And so it may or may not be true. But, honestly, Christine, why would you take a chance?
Yeah, why would you take the chance? I mean, I'm constantly looking at all of these tipping points. I see, the mother and father's genetic data, right? And they want to know, well, why does this look like this? Okay, we talk about, what's informed your familial history, and then they're sitting there and they're talking about, well, I go to work every day in the hospital, and the wife will be pregnant. And I immediately go, okay, well, without even looking at any of your current genetic variations, I guarantee you that your electromagnetic exposure is altering, your genetic responses. I don't need to look at anything specific to know that. And then, of course, for the people that need to know, we dive in and we look at it, and hopefully they're concerned enough before they have baby number 2, et cetera, and we can do some cleanup work. But it's just, yeah, why would you want to roll the dice with that?
Right, yeah, exactly. Why would you want to do that? Many in the scientific community talk about oxidative stress.
Yeah.
There's also calcium channel penetration of a cell.
Oh, talk about this. You and I talked about a little upgrade. I love it.
Yeah. Dr. Powell and many others talk about the cell breakdown, where as a result of a signal, a cell phone emission, electromagnetic radiation exposures, that the cell weakens and calcium channel penetrates the cell, mutate, and ultimately through a lot of chemical stuff, breaks out at the end with a mutated or a DNA damaged cell. And they talk about within 3 generations, we're not going to have any humans because that's the kind of exposure. They don't understand statistics. Every child that can bore children in the future are not going to have a mutated cell as a result of exposure. Just won't happen. Mm-hmm. But the stuff that really is important is the oxidative stress. I hate oxidative stress, by the way. The name oxidative stress. They talk about because they say it's the imbalance of antioxidants and free radicals, right? It's much, much more. And I'm getting to the point you were actually making a moment ago. It's the cell itself. It has a spontaneous response to any external influence, but whether it be chemical, whether it be hit. If you get hit with a hammer, the body responds, the cell responds. Dr. Navia talks about that as L-danger response. And that is truly a metabolic response to an event. And the body doesn't make it up for all different things. That's the general response. That it's in and of itself changes the chemical responses in the body. And it does disrupt natural patterns. In fact, when you have when you're in CDR, a cell danger response, mm-hmm. The metals in your body don't flush out of the body. For some reason, they get stored, right? And so those are disruptive challenges that happens to the body when there's exposures. And some of the modern discussions by Dr. Navia sort of tries to flesh that out.
And you just literally explained epigenetics, 101. You gave such a great example. And one of my other colleagues you met over at Upgrade, Dr. Drobot, he practices biological medicine, and he just makes it akin to, we've gotten ourselves to this point where we have to tear down the house and it's like what's in the soil and then rebuilding from the foundation up. And, this concept of building better biology. And I keep reminding people, your cells are listening to every little whisper. And if you don't pay attention, it's right. Literally going to become a megaphone.
Yeah. And it can cripple you. You can be, I know some patients that have actually gone into a clinic in a wheelchair, and they worked in really, really high electromagnetic radiation environments. And the cells just stopped functioning, and they didn't do their job. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, by the way, and I'm not sure we spoke about this, electromagnetic radiation, it suppresses your immune. And so when you have your environment that has high levels of electromagnetic radiation, your immune system actually is diminished. Dr. Ali Johansson specialized in this for years and years, and actually shows the mechanical breakdown of the cells as a result of it. But it's like your immune system being impacted, and that's not so good. Your sleep may be disrupted, and the recovery of your body from night to day is not happening because of those exposures. So it becomes, as you know, a vicious cycle. And you really have to understand where you are and try to disrupt that cycle so your health improves.
Well, you've got everybody staying indoors, so they're not activating their eyes with light and having nutrition from light. And you and I could talk all day about how, people are so deficient in omega-3 fatty acids, or the right ones, they're high quality. But, let's face it, the FCC isn't exactly doing parents any favors. They're not setting, any kind of realistic exposure standards. And I, have a note here. It's called the SAR standard. Is that right?
Yes, it is the SAR. Yes.
And that's where you talk about how all these, it's just kind of like the outdated medical model. We're basing it on a 6-foot tall man.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly what happened. Right. And we know so much more.
It blows me away. I mean, this is why, as more and more data begins to emerge and parents establish more stake in the game, schools have got to get back to hardwiring their environments. Are you seeing this with any of your clients? Are you consulting to more innovative or STEM-based schools?
Yeah, actually, by the way, you mentioned omegas. Dr. Navio actually did several studies, and he tried to find basic functions of the body that could benefit from treatments, one of which was omega. And so it gives the body the ability to be resilient in an environment. And it goes after inflammation. It's a very, very fundamental thing it does. Yet, it's been associated with improving Alzheimer's. It's been associated with improving pain. There's a lot of benefits people talk about in science from the omegas. And so that's one of those things, Christine, one of those very simple things to do that actually offsets our current environment.
Oh, just gonna say, I've got all these clients in the upper Northeast, and their families came from the old country. And what do they have? An abundance of the omega-3s.
Right, exactly.
And then you've got all these ancestors, they were fine, but then they send their kids off to go through the Industrial Revolution, and then, oh boy. Right. So, okay, let me let the cat out of the bag. Tell everybody how you're launching this incredible omega-3.
Well, I don't like to talk about products, but I will. I started, Christine, you may remember, I thought it was the gut that made us susceptible to electromagnetic radiation.
Yes.
And I began looking there as the source of the challenge, which I could help fix with maybe a gut product that could help. So I started there, but then I ended up from actually Navio's work with omega, but I knew that the omega had to be a very clean omega that doesn't oxidize in processing, doesn't use chemicals to cut out the within the processes of creating the omegas, and it had to be pure. It turns out that, and I don't know if we talked about this, but the level of omega you take typical on the marketplace is probably half, if not more, less than it should be to be effective. Mm-hmm. It's not effective because it's not enough of it. And so one of the things I did was I wanted to, from science, I actually found there were optimal batch doses that would be most effective for the body. And I had a hip replacement recently. I had an accident.
You mentioned that, I think.
Yeah, I had a hip replacement, and I took my omegas, which I took 4 a day, and I took 12 a day. Within 3 weeks, I was walking without a pain.
Oh,
it went after the inflammation. That's what it did.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're not exactly a sit around kind of guy to begin with.
I'm not. but so my point is, there are things you can do, and you should look for the right kinds of things to help. But to answer your question that you asked before, yes, I do actually talk with clinicians, believe it or not. I was talking with a clinician one time, and he was telling me that his one of his teammates had dry eye. And I said, well, what's it from? Do you know? and they said, not really. So what we've been doing for the last 5 years is we give a wet eye drops. And, it's been pretty effective. So as you may know, Christine, dry eye is a symptom of blue light from the monitors we use every day. And so I sent him a pair of blue light glasses, and I said, have her use these for a little bit and see what happens.
Nice.
Within 2 hours, her eyes went wet.
Oh my gosh. It is like day and night when you start using them. Everybody says
right.
You can't not notice a difference. That's so fantastic.
Yeah. And by the way, what's also associated with the blue light from the mirror is premature macular degeneration. So you've got to be careful about constantly using your monitor without some protection of some sort. Limit the time, use blue light blocking glasses, but be careful, because there is a long-term potential impact, not so good at impact either.
Well, you and I both know that humans are bad at the long game, right? They just want everything exactly. Short term.
It is.
I've been, whenever I'm kind of meditating, I take the last few minutes to just kind of be like a kid and go somewhere in my imagination that's fun. And I was like, what about starting a company that has a lifetime prescription box, right? That has like this graduated set of tools that you use generation by generation. I mean, we're at that point, I feel like.
When we started, I mentioned that, you had a lot of computers and a bunch of telephone stuff for years and years and years around us, but it was never in our pockets. And today we have it in our pockets. So the exposures are maximized with those devices in our pockets. And our body hasn't figured out how to deal with it. And it does have consequence.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does have a consequence. And I'm a data-driven person, but look, it only takes my common sense to know, what we've talked about before: headaches, nosebleeds, attention, focus issues. I mean, this is not a healthy trend in adults. You and I both obviously see, the hypersensitivity on the rise. Besides take the AirPods out of your skull, what are you telling these younger tech career driven people with some of the highest exposures, or people who work in hospitals? What are you telling them?
Christine, thank you for talking about that. The ears, these things you put that wirelessly work with your Bluetooth and your cell phone.
Oh my gosh, so crazy.
It's crazy. So a cell phone generates 1.6 watts per kilogram. That's the power level. Bluetooth is about 3 or 4 watts per kilogram.
Okay.
Milliwatts. So it takes 15 times less power level of a cell phone, 1 watt per kilogram, to disrupt the cell. So when you have those things in your ear, they're 3 watts per kilogram, and they're passing through your head, because that's how they give you the stereo and some of the devices that are on the market. And that takes 0.1 watts, not 0.3 watts, 0.1 watt to disrupt the cell. And that's science. We know that through studies that maybe 20 years ago we knew that. So it's when you're at risk when you take that technology and use it heavily. If you're using it only for minutes at a time, it's not a big deal. But when you're using it for long-term use, it can potentially create serious problems.
Well, it's just going to reduce your human sensitivities to the
Yes.
world, which, we forget are kind of our superpowers too. You've got these things just nesting in your ears all day, and
Yeah.
it tunes you out to other things that you need to be naturally paying attention to. So just think of these things on the more basic level.
Yes.
It makes me think about how you're going to have to get into a conversation with Elon about Neuralink one of these days.
Oh my goodness. You don't want me to talk about that.
We'll talk about that another time. Yeah.
At another time. Let's change the subject about sleep.
Yeah.
I know that's on the top of your list as being important. I was on a podcast with a very, very bright lady, and I said, your bedroom needs to be a sanctuary. You have to remove all toxins in that room. The gas of gasoline that's open, you should remove that. That is a carcinogenic, a probable carcinogenic, but so is Wi-Fi. So when you have a Wi-Fi in your room, or you have a cell phone in your room, you have a laptop in your room, and they're transmitting, that's potential carcinogenic and disrupting sleep. And so let's start with the beginning of what disrupts sleep. Blue light is when you're looking at a monitor, your tablet, for example, or your iPad, and there's blue light coming in. The blue light is telling your inside the eye that it's still light out. So let's not go to sleep yet. And by the way, let's not create melatonin.
Yeah, exactly. You just called it.
Yeah, and there's a little switch, cryptochrome switch, cryptochrome protein actually. And it's the little switch that goes on and off. So when you're looking at that, the blue light's saying, keep the switch on. We don't have to turn it off yet, so let the melatonin work. So all of a sudden you want to go to sleep when you've finished looking at your iPad, and you can't.
And you can't.
That's because the cycle hasn't started to create the sleep pattern you're looking for. So it all begins there, and it just continues. In serious cases, which we know from some clinics we work with, that the cell phone on your table next to the bed is literally interfering with the brain pattern in your brain.
Oh, it's level with people's heads too.
Yeah, because it's so close, and there are cases where you're sleeping at night and you're actually walking during the day from a wave pattern, and vice versa. Delta is working at the wrong time, in other words. And so it disrupts those functions, and you can't repair. So if your body's been exposed during the day and the microcardial function needs to be improved, without a circadian rhythm, your body won't recover. So it's a cyclic condition that it makes it worse and worse. So I told this lady, get everything out of your bed. And she was very polite, and she said, oh, thank you so much for that information. I'll share that, right? She called me back in 2 weeks, and she said, my husband and I took our cell phones out. We're sleeping now.
That's so
a simple thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, simple stuff. Just be aware of your environment. That's all. Actually, I talk about that as bees in the room. The way you can deal with your environment is think about one bee won't kill you unless you're allergic. 1,000 will. So the idea is get rid of all the bees. And a cell phone has 3 bees: Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cell tower. And the more you have, the worse it is. Simply remove the bees, turn them off, move them out.
I love that. That's a great way to think about that. Well, I mean, everybody who has come to me when I was in my traditional private practice, what are they coming in with? Stress, gut issues, and sleep issues, right? And they don't realize that they're causing their issues 90% of the time. They sit under fluorescent light in front of the screen, and then they're doing the thing in beds, doing the scroll, setting it next to them. Yeah.
Right.
Huge.
Right. You just have to be disciplined. And another message I often tell people is like, you own your body and no one's going to protect necessarily you. It's in your control. And don't expect someone to protect you. Like, for example, the FCC. Oh, cell phone won't hurt you. Well, that's not true. The FCC decided that what the standard was, and it was for 3% of the population.
Yeah, well, I think we've seen the evidence that we need to take health into our own hands and then some.
Yeah, of course. Of
Well,
course.
Dan, okay, so you're just like I am. You're excited about all the other healthy tech, right? What are your favorite biohacks that you love to combine with Defender Shield? That was one of the most popular questions from my audience. What's Dan doing? I want to know what Dan's doing.
Well, actually, but believe it, well, you know better than I do. It's what you eat is what you are.
Yeah,
so for me, my starting point is I'm pretty disciplined on my eating habits and the kind of foods I eat. I try to stay away from calories that don't make sense, and fruits and vegetables, balanced meals. So I start there. I also exercise. I used to do yoga for years, and my hips doesn't let me do that right now. but keeping a balanced diet, exercising right, and having a solid sleeping pattern, which is, I mean, I go to bed at 10 o'clock, whether I'm tired or not. That helps you actually with your cyclic rhythm. And I find the combination of all those things actually does make a difference and keeps you healthy.
I mean, getting back to basics, does your family line trace back to a blue zone, one of the healthiest areas? Are you from the Mediterranean?
Actually, my mother is close to mother. She's Italian. And my father's French.
Okay, well, hello, there you go then. Eat good food, get some light, get some sleep.
Right, yeah, and Christine, you just said it, light. You get your vitamin D from light. Get out, exercise, enjoy the sun, and it's doing far more than keeping you healthy. It's keeping you balanced and healthy.
You've already bestowed so many words of wisdom, but what do you want to leave folks with today? There's so much going on in the world. I mean, there's this message of getting back to basics, but what would you like to leave folks with today?
I wasn't kidding when I said we're the architects of our own destiny. And we can't hope that someone else is going to make sure that we have the right things in our life. And so for me, it's like, take control of your environment and control as much as you can, and don't worry about what you can't. The other thing I also talk about is make sure you that you understand what it is that life's all about. When you get close to a serious problem with your health, the first thing you think about is the most important things in your life. Those are your family and friends. It's not the job you did. It's not the great talk you gave. It's your relationship with your family and friends. So make sure you treat that with respect and keep all your family and friends close.
Aw, I love that. That's always the most important thing.
Yeah. People don't realize it.
Yeah.
Until it's too late, oftentimes.
Well, thank you, Dan. This is so awesome. Thanks for being here, and thanks for just being you. I really appreciate who you are and the way that you just make everything so conversational. You're really great at making all the science tangible, and I appreciate that about you. It's a real skill. It is.
Well, thank you so much. It was when I realized is that's what I was maybe a conduit for. I sort of stayed on the technical side for so many years, but it was important for all of us to understand it. And I certainly didn't understand it until I started paying attention. And my goal was to help people understand.
Well, you're pretty darn likable. I love talking to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Keep entering into those conversations with people everywhere. Thank you. All
Okay,
right.
thank you
Well,
very
thanks for
much.
being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really did enjoy it. And you're a wonderful conversationist as well. I'm only as good as you are because you're really good.
Well, hopefully we'll have the next one. Like I said, maybe in a sunny spot over some really good coffee or tea.
Yeah, and we'll talk about 5G.
Oh my gosh. I'll just sit back and listen and hopefully, yeah, we'll just hit record.
And the discussion I'm going to have with Musk about his, 23 gigahertz signals coming to Earth.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know if I'm ready to talk about that yet.
Right. You're probably right.
Well,
Okay.
thanks again. We'll talk to you more soon. I can't wait to share this with the audience. You be awesome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.